live by telephone. Good morning, Congressman Paul. Thanks for getting up early and coming on with us. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Now, the first, we talk to you all the time when you're on about the Federal Reserve, and I actually may get to that in a moment, but I wanted to ask you about your view on FEMA in wake of what's happened with Hurricane Irene before we get to that. From what I've read and what I've seen in your comments, you think we'd almost be better off without this agency, which is set up to help out in disasters. But tell us your own view before I put words in your mouth of what should happen with FEMA.
Well, in the 1970s, FEMA was created by an executive order by Carter. And I was in the Congress at the time, and I opposed it because I thought it was bad economic policy to have government buy insurance for people because they couldn't afford it in low areas, which to me meant that they would encourage more building, and take more risk. Insurance is a good idea because it tells you how much risk you're taking. But once you destroy the principle of insurance, you invite more trouble, and we've been doing it. It's been very, very expensive,
right.
And we are we're not only is the country broke, but FEMA is broke too. So economically, I think it's a very bad thing to do. But the big problem is people like to pull that stuff up. All of a sudden they see a lot of suffering and a lot of problems, and they think, well, this is the only way you can do it. Yeah, government actually makes problems worse so often rather than solving problems. FEMA is really an inefficient agency when you look at it in detail, too.
Oh, it may be, but what about the people up in, just to isolate one area, in Vermont today, for example, and I just bring up Vermont because we were talking just in the last hour to one of the emergency management officials up there, and they're talking about all these towns that are isolated, and I said to him at the end of the interview, how are you paying for this? And he said, yeah, we're getting a lot of help from the federal government to do it. A lot of these states, as you know, are strapped for cash. Doesn't FEMA help out in this particular situation when things are so bad? And
You don't think the federal government's strapped?
No, of course it is, but I mean...
They don't have any money at all. I mean, all we have to do is every penny we spend, we borrow.
Right.
I mean, so this whole thing about the states being strapped for... Of course, sure, there's a humanitarian concern that people have. Matter of fact, I've been very open to taking care of these problems, even though in principle I think it was in the wrong direction, because I live on the coast, and we have hurricanes here, and they're in my district. But I've had this position all along, and yet the position really is a very popular position because the people get so disgusted with FEMA. I've had more complaints about FEMA than all the other agencies of government put together.
No, I can understand it from an ideological point of view, but you're saying in these situations we have to help the people.
Yeah, this is what I would do, though, and this is what I proposed in the past, is that since we don't have any money in the bank, and it's a very, very serious economic problem that we face, I say cut spending someplace, cut enough where you can cut some deficit, such as overseas. Just think of the $1.4 trillion we're spending to maintain an empire. I could find $5 billion pretty easily, put half of it toward the deficit and put half of it toward our infrastructure. So, yes, I understand how we get, I mean, just think of all the programs that are technically unconstitutional in this country that people are so dependent on, whether it's medical care or for the elderly or whatever, and yet there's no money. So I would say that if you care about the economy and if you think there's any concern at all about our economic system and our financial system, we have to quit some of this spending. So all I'm saying is use some common sense, take care of these people, save the money, cut the deficit, and I think the world would be better for it.
Quick question on the Federal Reserve, just to change topics on you real quick, Congressman Paul. A lot of people pointing to the markets this morning and what we're covering and saying, boy, the Federal Reserve might take even more action. That seems to be their takeaway from watching Ben Bernanke make his speech last week and the minutes of the meeting that were released yesterday. Your thoughts, and being a longtime critic of the Fed, in terms of more action that could be taken to help the economy?
Well, I think they take action steadily. You know, he announced that he would keep interest down to practically zero up until 2013. Well, that's major action.
Right.
And but he doesn't call it a QE. But in a way, it is. How do you keep interest rates down that low? You have to steadily buy debt. He's guaranteed that there will be no relinquishing on his efforts to continue the monetization of debt. So that's how we got into trouble. Even when Greenspan was in, it was said that he kept interest rates too low too long. Well, that was in a way a quantitative easing. That's all the Fed can do. They do it with they do it steadily. That's the only tool that they have. And at times they have surges in their buying of debt and injecting more money. But the problems are always there. It's always cover up, and that is the problem. That cannot be the solution.
How would a President Ron Paul work with Ben Bernanke? Because, you know, as critical as you've been, you guys would be stuck working together if you were elected, Congressman Paul, wouldn't you be? I mean, he's the chairman.
In theory, I thought the Fed was supposed to be independent. That's what they argue all the time. Of course, the president always works with them. I mean, and it isn't Bernanke himself that is the problem. It is the system. It's the system that you have no restraints on monetary authority, which means you have no restraints on spending, because the Congress does not have to be responsible. So in a way, Bernanke was somewhat correct the other day. He says, I'm throwing up my hands. I can't do anything more. It's all up to the Congress. But he could do a lot more. Congress should quit spending, and then they don't put the pressure on the Fed to monetize. But if the Federal Reserve was not allowed to monetize, the Congress would see the interest rates rising, and there would be an automatic check on it. So, no, Bernanke, you're not supposed to run the Federal Reserve. Of course, that is all a farce. They complain. They always argue that they're independent. But it's the system that you have to address, and someday we'll have to, not because all of a sudden people will gain wisdom, but this system is on its last legs. The dollar reserve standard of the world is failing, and that's why the world is in chaos.
All right, let me ask you a little bit about the campaign then. You've done, you know, had success certainly in Iowa in the straw poll, and we're talking earlier about how you've moved up in some of the other polls. It'll be interesting to see, and we talk about this all the time, how the campaign develops over time. People always try to make it into top tier and bottom, all this, you know, all this kind of handicapping so early in the race. But how do you see it developing? Because inevitably somebody's going to drop out. Over, you know, it already happened with Tim Pawlenty, and as that happens, do supporters of certain candidates go to you, or is this theory that some have thrown out there correct, that the supporters that Ron Paul is going to get already support him? There's such a strong base of support, but how will you be able to expand upon that base?
All I know is my job is to keep doing what I've been doing for 30 years, and all of a sudden there's been a surge of interest in what I've been doing, and there's certainly a need. The people are tired of the wars. They know there's something wrong with the Federal Reserve. They know the spending is a tremendous hazard to us. So people are coming over. And the one thing that all the polls show is if you are a Ron Paul supporter, you usually don't leave. So there's no bouncing up and down. And
right.
The other ones, you know, there's a lot of shifting around. So when new people enter the race, they say, oh, what's it going to do to you? Well, it doesn't do anything to me. It just dilutes the other field. But I think we have steady growth. That's about all I can say. And it's been that way over many years, and certainly over the last 4 years, we have seen this happening.
Well, let me follow up on that point, because you're probably right about that in terms of you're not losing support. So let's say Rick Perry enters the race, or whoever might still make a late entry into the race. You don't necessarily lose any of your core supporters there, but when someone leaves the race, are you able to kind of broaden the scope enough or be attractive to people who don't currently support you and may support somebody else who's still running but will at some point drop out? For example, a Pawlenty supporter coming to you. Do you see enough of that? Or will you be able to do enough of that?
Well, it remains to be seen. But, yes, we see it all the time because that's where our growth would have to come from. But I don't know if anybody can actually measure that. But no, we're always reaching out to people, and the longer the time goes on, the more appropriate our review seems to be.
All right, Congressman Paul, it was good to talk to you again. We'll check back as the campaign continues.
Thanks
for coming on.
Bye.
Congressman Ron Paul, running for president on the Republican